Welcome back, Focus Learners. Today we're diving into a really fascinating explainer all about the institutionalization of business ethics. Okay, I know, that sounds like a total mouthful, right? But stick with me, because what we're actually unpacking is the real-world ecosystem of laws, norms, and initiatives that literally dictate how corporations behave. We're going to break this all down so that by the end, you'll have a rock-solid understanding of exactly how and why businesses operate the way they do. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We'll start by defining the boundaries of corporate behavior, and then we'll look at mandated compliance, which is basically the law. Third, we'll examine major reforms like SOX and Dodd-Frank, before we shift over to core practices, and finally, we'll wrap up by exploring what it means to go beyond those basics with voluntary responsibilities. But before we get completely bogged down in heavy legal frameworks, I want you to stop and really think about this question. Why do businesses behave? I mean, is it because corporations are inherently good, driven by this strong internal moral compass, or do they act ethically simply because society and the law force them to? It's kind of the ultimate debate of human, or I guess in this case, corporate nature. And honestly, the truth is usually a really complex mix of both, driven by a highly structured system. And that structured system brings us right to our baseline definition for today: institutionalization. Now, this isn't just about having some vague sense of right and wrong. It actually refers to the specific legal and societal forces that reward and punish organizations based on how stakeholders evaluate their conduct. You can really think of it as a finely tuned system of carrots and sticks. It's this integration of laws, corporate culture, and industry best practices that all work together to manage the risk of misconduct. All right, let's move right into our first section, the boundaries of corporate behavior. We're going to explore how laws and internal company culture create the fundamental foundation for all corporate actions. Cultivating a strong ethical culture has a massive real-world impact. When an organization actually takes the time to build one, the results are literally staggering. We see 36% more employees actively reporting misconduct, and 55% fewer employees actually observing it in the first place. So this proves that business ethics is definitely not just some theoretical exercise. A strong culture creates a very tangible, measurable drop in ethical risks. Which brings us to Section 2, the law, or mandated compliance. If we think of business ethics as a house, the law represents the non-negotiable floor of appropriate conduct. You simply cannot go lower than this without facing civil or criminal penalties. Now, to understand this legal floor, we kind of need to look at how it was built. Tracing the history, we see a legal blitz that evolved over more than a century. Back in 1890, you had the Sherman Antitrust Act stepping in to break up massive monopolies. Then by 1906, public outrage over gross, unsanitary meatpacking led straight to the Pure Food and Drug Act. Fast forward to the 1960s and 70s, where Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, along with OSHA, established fundamental equity and safety for workers. And that brings us right up to 2010, with the Dodd-Frank Act completely overhauling the financial sector. What this history really shows us is that mandated boundaries are constantly evolving to meet whatever society is demanding at the time. And what's really fascinating here is just the sheer volume of it all. Companies have to navigate incredibly dense lists of antitrust and consumer protection laws every single day. On one side, we've got laws regulating competition, things designed to prevent price fixing and corporate espionage. And then on the other side, we have laws protecting consumers, which require businesses to provide accurate information and fundamentally safe products. It is just a massive, complex web of compliance. Let's actually ground those abstract consumer laws in a tangible reality, shall we? $170 million. That is the massive settlement the FTC slapped YouTube with. And why? Because they violated COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, by collecting data on kids without getting parental consent. That number right there is a very stark reminder that consumer protection laws are definitely not just suggestions. Regulatory bodies have incredibly sharp teeth, and they will absolutely use them when that legal floor is breached. Let's move along to Section 3, where we're looking at major reforms, specifically SOX and Dodd-Frank. These major reforms certainly weren't created in a vacuum. They were born out of absolutely epic corporate and financial failures that rocked the global economy. So, the crucial point here is distinguishing between these two giant legislative acts. Sarbanes-Oxley, or SOX, was passed back in 2002 as a direct response to massive accounting fraud at companies like Enron. It literally created the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board to police auditors. Dodd-Frank, on the other hand, was passed in 2010 following the devastation of the Great Recession. Its goal was a total overhaul of the broader financial regulatory system, and it famously created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, it is super important to note that these reforms are still highly debated today. If we look at Dodd-Frank impartially, it has very vocal proponents and critics. Supporters absolutely champion it for protecting everyday consumers and trying to prevent another 2008-level crisis through increased oversight. Critics, however, argue that its rules on derivatives are just way too burdensome, that it stifles economic growth, and that it represents a severe case of government overreach. But regardless of where you might stand politically, its impact on the institutionalization of business is just undeniable. All right, let's transition away from that strict legal floor and step up into the buffer zone of industry norms in Section 4, Core Practices and Federal Guidelines. So, core practices sit comfortably right above the law. They are essentially documented best practices that are highly encouraged by regulators and industry groups. Now, they aren't exactly laws themselves, but they're basically the government's way of incentivizing good behavior before misconduct even has a chance to happen. Think of it as complying with expected norms, because if you ignore them, you are dramatically increasing your risk of tumbling right through that legal floor we talked about earlier. So, how does a company actually build these core practices? Well, the Federal Sentencing Guidelines for Organizations, or FSGO, gives us an exact blueprint. Basically, companies need to establish clear standards, ensure high-ranking oversight, keep individuals with a propensity for misconduct out of leadership roles, actively communicate and train their employees, create safe reporting systems, and, this is key, actually take disciplinary action when things go wrong. Because if a company follows all these steps and a rogue employee still goes out and commits a crime, the government might actually significantly reduce the company's penalties. To see exactly why these core practices are absolutely critical, just consider this real-world example. The SEC actually launched an investigation into the massive accounting firm Ernst & Young for alleged bid rigging. This completely highlights the vital importance of auditor independence rules and ethical guardrails. Because when high-ranking executives bypass those core practices just to win contracts, it completely destroys the foundational trust between businesses, gatekeepers, and the general public. Let's move to our fifth and final section and see how all of this builds up to the ceiling of business ethics. We're talking about going beyond voluntary responsibilities. This is the proactive, culturally enriching side of corporate behavior. There are three main ways organizations push these voluntary boundaries using their core competencies. First up is cause-related marketing, where a product's sales are directly tied to a specific social concern. Second is strategic philanthropy, which is the mutually beneficial use of an organization's resources to tackle big societal issues. And third is social entrepreneurship, where an entire organization is literally founded with the specific primary purpose of creating social value. Let's look at strategic philanthropy in action for a second. $1.4 billion. That is the staggering amount donated by the Walmart Foundation to support causes like education, the environment, and disaster relief. And look, this isn't just about giving away money blindly. It's a highly strategic approach that improves the communities where their customers and employees actually live. And in turn, that builds massive customer loyalty and goodwill. And here is perhaps the ultimate example of social entrepreneurship, Tom's. They have given away almost 100 million pairs of shoes to communities in need. For a social enterprise like Tom's, solving a social problem isn't just some cute marketing add-on, it is the fundamental, primary goal of their existence. Yes, they utilize traditional business strategies, but their ultimate bottom line is literally measured in social impact. We have definitely covered a lot of ground today in this explainer, from the rigid floor of the law, through the buffer zone of core practices, all the way up to the voluntary ceiling of social entrepreneurship. But I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If the law is only the floor, how high will the ceiling of business ethics actually go? I mean, as society's expectations continue to evolve, will today's voluntary actions become tomorrow's mandated laws? Which of these pillars do you think will truly drive the future of business? Keep asking those tough questions. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.